and distinguished speaker, ladies and gentlemen, very good afternoon and good evening to our friend in the Pacific Island, and good morning here in Europe. My name is Harry Huang, and I'm Deputy Director for the Regional Department for Asia and the Pacific at UNWTO. And I'm sure some of you who are sensitive already noticed my haircut. Well, I finally had a haircut after almost 2 months. And why am I telling about my haircut? Because I just wanted to share a glimmer of hope for the tourism industry here in Madrid. And indeed, Madrid has been one of the most affected destinations, but we see some, the substantial decrease, both infection and death toll. So we are allowed to go out for limited, distance from this week. So I was able to get a haircut. Of course, it had to be pre-arranged. And this is a good symptom. And I'm very happy to extend a very warm welcome to all of you from a very sunny side of Madrid, in which the World Tourism Organization headquarters is located. And I thank you so much for joining our UNWTO webinar on the impact of COVID-19 on tourism. And this is the third edition that the Regional Department for Asia and the Pacific of UNWTO offered to our member state with a series of webinars in collaboration with our technical department. And RDAP is extremely happy to organize this webinar with the TMIC. TMIC stands for Tourism Market Intelligence and Competitiveness, in which Sandra Cabal is supervising as a chief. And we believe this TMIC department is indeed the think tank in the organization. So with that, I thank you so much, Sandra, and your team for supporting this exclusive webinar for our members in Asia and the Pacific. And we are very grateful to all leading experts who are sharing your precious time with us. And I will leave Sandra to introduce all the distinct speaker when she moderates. But we are all looking forward to your expert ideas and knowledges and insight. And before I invite Sandra, maybe I just want to share a few housekeeping announcements. And for your information that this webinar is now on YouTube, live streaming. And also, please excuse to our members that we are not being able to invite all of you, each one of you, to the screen and seeing your face. And we receive your comment, intervention, and questions through the question and answer the room chat here or chat. So our colleague will collect your question. And on behalf of the World Tourism Organization, it is my great pleasure to invite Dr. Haiyan Song for his setting the scene presentation on the visitor forecast of Asia and the Pacific amid COVID-19. So while Dr. Song prepared for your presentation, allow me to introduce Dr. Song. Dr. Song, as being Associate Dean and Chair Professor of the School of Hotel and Tourism Management of the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, he is one of the great contributors with numerous tourism projects that we carry on together with the UNWTO. And he is serving as a chairperson, vice president of the International Association for Tourism Economy. And he was the very key person when we established the UNWTO PATA Regional Forum on Tourism Trend and Outlook, which is our annual gathering in the permanent host city of Lin in China. And this is again that we get technical assistance from TMIC department and Hong Kong Polytechnic University. So I guess that Dr. Song is ready now for his presentation. So Dr. Song, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Huang, for your very kind introduction. Today, I'm going to share with you briefly the Asia-Pacific visitor forecast that we generated for PATA. We are engaged by PATA to carry out annual visitor forecast for about 40 destinations within Asia-Pacific. So I'm today only very briefly to present some very high level or high aggregated result. Due to time constraints, the individual countries' forecast will not be presented here, but we will have another webinar organized by PATA on the 14th. So if you're interested in more details, you are welcome to join another webinar on the 14th, organized by PATA. So these countries are the destinations where we produce forecasts for them. As you can see, it's roughly about 40 countries under different sub-regions within Asia-Pacific. For each country, we generate tourist arrivals and also tourist receipt forecasts from a number of source markets. Every destination normally will have at least 30 to 40, even more source markets. So we generate forecasts according to this source market for each destinations. The method we are using actually are a two-stage forecasting method. The first stage basically is a statistical forecast using either econometric forecasting method or time series forecasting method, depend on the availability of the explanatory variables data. Most of the destinations actually we use econometric forecasts, which incorporate the determinants to see how those determinants will influence travel to the destinations concerned. After we generate all the statistical forecasts, and we then send our forecast to a panel of experts who are industry leaders, academics, familiar with forecasts and the trend in the region, for them to look at to see whether there's any errors or inaccuracy in our forecast, so that we will carry out a panel of expert adjustment. And this is particularly useful this time because our forecast was generated last December, so before coronavirus started. But since the forecast were already generated, and from 2020 January, there was a coronavirus occurred, so that we have to make adjustments. So that's why the expert adjustment become even more important in this process. I'm going to show you a few slides, a very aggregated forecast. For example, this is visitor arrivals and receipt within Asia Pacific across all sub-regions. You can see there still be an increase of arrivals and a receipt at the time when we generate forecasts in 2019, end of 2019. So the growth rate of both arrivals and the receipt are between 5% to 6% over the 7% over the next five years up to 2024. And in terms of the market share of arrivals within Asia Pacific, you can see Northeast Asia will still continue to be the dominant inbound market in Asia Pacific, and followed by Americas and Southeast Asia. And South Asia then follows. So almost half or 50%, close to 50% of arrivals actually are concentrated in Northeast Asia. So this is actually still a largest market over the next few years. This is arrivals. But in terms of receipt, you can see things has changed a little bit. Although Asia, Northeast Asia are still quite large in terms of market share, but Americas actually is the largest. But this will change after 2020. So after 2020, receipt in Northeast Asia will take over, will surpass Americas, become the largest market. So these are the receipt share. In terms of per capita tourist receipt or income generated from tourists, as you can see, South Asia, this is over average over 5-year period. South Asia is the highest with $2,545,000 over the period 2020-2004, followed by Pacific, Americas, and Southeast Asia. I guess in Southeast Asia, a lot of day trippers, especially between Greater China, are short stays. So that's why the receipt per capita is lower than other regions. So this is the per capita receipt over the forecasting period, average. But however, these are actually very aggregated forecasts for different regions in terms of arrivals and the receipt. But after our forecast, we know COVID-19 was identified in Wuhan in January 2020, and then spread to the rest of the world since then. And this has had a profound negative impact on both international and domestic travels. And this is mainly due to the closures of airport, public transportations, tourist attractions, and also various type of accommodations, and also border closing and visa restrictions in some countries or within a country or in some regions. The travel actually was completely stopped. So our forecasts therefore become obsolete as a result. So we have to readjust our original forecast. It is impossible for us to redo all the forecasts. As you can imagine, there will be around 1,500 models to be estimated if you think all the destinations and source market. So then we have to adjust this forecast to present to the users with meaningful result after the coronavirus occurred. So the method we made the adjustment is based on looking at the past research related to the impact of pandemics on tourism. I listed a few authors who have done similar research in the past, looking at the impact of other crises, including public health crisis. And also we look at the impact assessment of COVID-19 on the national economies by Oxford Economics. They actually look at how COVID-19 actually influenced the economic growth of different countries. And we know economic growth is closely related to the demand for tourism. So this will be a very important indicator for adjustment. And also we look at the information on travel restrictions, vaccine development, expert predictions on the recurrence of COVID-19 in the future. So all these informations are synthesized and considered in our adjustment. And we developed 3 scenarios. One is optimistic scenario, second is most likely scenario, and also pessimistic scenarios. Those scenarios are developed based on the information that I presented earlier, especially with the vaccine development. Actually, this is the key whether the tourism will return to normal or new normal in the future. So after taking all this information into consideration, actually we adjusted arrivals and the receipt for all destinations and also all source market to those destinations. But I will not present the individual countries adjustment. I only present the overall adjustment for the sub-regions within Asia Pacific. The first sub-region is Northeast Asia, which is actually most badly influenced sub-region within Asia Pacific. From this diagram, as you can see, the optimistic scenario suggests that in 2020, the decline will be 30% in terms of arrivals to the region. And the time point that the tourist arrivals will return to the original long-term trend will be first quarter 2021, next year, the first quarter of next year. For the most likely scenario, this is what actually we think will likely to happen, is that 53% decline in arrivals into this region, and the recovery will take a little bit longer, and the recover to the original trend will be the third quarter of 2021. But if there's no vaccine or the things were getting very bad, and there may be reoccurrence of the spread of the virus, and the decline can be 66%, and the recovery will be even slower until quarter 2 of 2020. This is Northeast Asia. And South Asia is slightly better, but the number actually, the arrival number is relatively smaller, but most likely scenario for 2020 will be 37% reduction in arrivals, and the recovery will take a little bit longer until quarter 3 of next year to return to its original forecast trend. And also the pessimistic scenario suggests that 44% reduction in arrivals in 2020, and the recovery will even slower until 2020, the second quarter. And Southeast Asia, a similar pattern. And also the most likely scenario is that in the 2020, the reduction in arrivals will be around 27%, and then recover to the original forecast trend in the third quarter of 2021. Well, so actually this region is relatively less affected, but in Pacific is also probably the least affected region. As you can see, in this year, likely there will be 20% reduction, knowing some of the countries, the borders already started to open, and also the cases, confirmed cases was not that many. So the effect will be relatively less. And even in the pessimistic scenario, this only about 30% reduction in arrivals, and the recovery will up to second quarter of 2020. Okay, so these are the brief figures that I would like to show you. I'm sure later other panelists will show you some specific, more details trend, but this is just set the scene for further discussion. So in conclusion, COVID-19 is still ongoing, and the forecasts are likely to change, and the recovery pattern is unknown, as COVID-19 differ from other pandemics. Some people say the recovery may be L-shaped. In our recovery pattern, we identified it as a V-shape. And some say it is W-shaped, some say it is U-shaped. But in my view, those different shapes depend on the frequency of the data you are looking at. If you're looking at daily data, probably it will be a U shaped recovery, but quarterly, it will be W shape. But for annual data, which I present to you, it will be more likely to be a V-shaped recovery. And international travel will not be the same after COVID-19 pandemic due to health concerns. And here is some of the things that I think will not be the same after this pandemic. I'm sure the aircraft seatings will be redesigned with a view to keeping the distance between passengers, and also restrictions at airport will be stricter. In the Hong Kong experience, actually at Hong Kong airport, in the entrance, we installed disinfection units. When the passenger go through these units, and they will be tested, temperature, body temperature will be tested, and they will be disinfected. So when they came out from the unit, they will become clean. So this actually is a measure to keep the travelers travel safely. And also attractions, accommodations, and restaurants, their operation standard will be amended with a view to consider the health of their customers. Another point I'd like to mention is that in the future, there may be a way to identify or to ensure that the travelers are healthy travelers, either through a digital passport or safety code alike. But this actually measure may be applicable to some countries, but not necessarily to all countries due to different values of the citizens in different countries. I think that's what I'm going to present today. And thank you very much for listening, and I will be happy to take any questions thereafter.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Song, for your very informative presentation. And I'm sure your setting the scene presentation serves well for our further intervention and panel debate. And actually, there was a couple of questions from our member state from Fiji and Cambodia. And our colleague from Fiji wanted to clarify indeed whether the Wuhan virus was found in January 2020, or was it 2019 December? So Dr. Song, can you just clarify on this very shortly?
I think, yeah, the initial case was reported end of December, but it's formally announced, reported UNWTO in January 2020. That is what I understand.
All right, and the second question from our colleague from Cambodia, he mentioned that how do we define the time point of the recovery? I think that this is something maybe I will leave it to Sandra for our panel discussion, and I'm sure that many of the experts have a say in terms of when and how the recovery come. So now, in front of all the members, including associate and affiliate member, I would like to repeat and acknowledge the three main achievements out of many. I say three main achievements. What Sandra Cabral, who is the chief of TMIC department, and her great team produced the report and the recommendation. I think this is the word that to remind all members. So number one is that we had a very timely report on the impact assessment of the COVID-19 outbreak on international tourism. And I understand Sandra will touch some part of this impact. And second one is that the mapping of the COVID-19, the measure to support travel and the tourism sector. So if you come to visit our UNWTO website, we have exclusive, the COVID-19 website in which you will see the worldwide map. And if you click any country in the map, you will immediately see what has been the policy and measure to aid package to the industry and travel sector. So this is a very good reference. You can compare. We have put it more than 150 countries, and we meant to update it. So this is something. And then lastly, we are very happy to tell you that we also launched a comprehensive recommendation on supporting job and economy through travel and tourism. And this is subtitled A Call for Action to Mitigate the Socio-Economic Impact of the COVID-19 and accelerate the recovery. So all these three are including many others that we designed to help our members to mitigate the impact and accelerate recovery. So this webinar is another same objective that we are introducing. So with that and without any further interruption, I would like to give Sandra Cabal for your show, Sandra.
Thank you very much, Harry. It's a pleasure to be with all the colleagues from different countries in Asia Pacific, and also with all those who are following us through the YouTube channel, as we initiate the fourth actually in a series of data webinars that UNWTO has been organizing with several partners. We've been going from region to region. We've been in Europe and the Americas. We've been now in Asia. So it's very good to have that in-depth view of what's happening in each of the regions. I'd like to ask the colleagues who are in Zoom, the countries represented here, please feel free to ask, as Harry mentioned, your questions through the chat. We'll be happy to take them as we initiate the debate with our panelists, so that we actually not only can share what we're doing with you, but also that we can hear from you. Any questions or comments on what you're seeing in your own country are more than welcome. Without any further ado, I'd like to share with you, Professor Song actually gave us a view of Asian Pacific, and I'm going to go a little bit to the bird's view, a little bit higher, and I'd like to share with you our latest assessment on the impact of COVID-19 in terms of international tourism worldwide. I can tell you this is a totally premiere. The press release about it as just came out, I would say 1 minute ago. So very timely, and we're very happy that we can share with you this new assessment today. We all know that we're facing one of the biggest crises that our sector has presented, and obviously when we look at the crisis of tourism induced crisis before, like 9/11 or SARS, we tend to look for patterns, and obviously this is very different. So this is one of the most challenging factors that we have, and Professor Song mentioned it, when we deal with trying to identify scenarios. So the first information I'd like to share is actually what we have seen already in the period January-March. And our colleagues from the different partners will share with you big data, which actually gives you, I would say, the day-to-day almost view. What we're reporting from UNWTO, it's what countries already saw during those first 3 months. And actually, what has been deploying the situation is that the fact that, as this was mentioned, we are currently in most countries with lockdowns. And we have a UNWTO report has found out 100% of worldwide destinations have introduced some kind of travel restriction, which means that international tourism is basically on a standstill at the moment. What has this meant for international flows during the first quarter of this year? So we see already a decrease of 22% overall, with obviously a very strong trend down in March. Although in Asia, the lockdowns and the restrictions started much earlier, in Europe, they started mid-March, but that impacted strongly already the destinations. So you can see that overall, there's an estimated loss of 67 million international tourist arrivals during that period, if we actually compare it with the previous one. If you look at the regions, naturally, Asia was the one most impacted with a 35% decrease in arrivals, but also Europe was very affected with a decrease of 19%. In relative terms, this is lower, but actually when we look at volume, considering that Europe receives around 50% of all international arrivals, the difference is Asia lost an estimated 30 million arrivals, while Europe lost 20 million. So the impact of the two regions actually brought the results of the world down. As you can see, it was a situation that evolved during the month. I think this is something that you all will see in your own destinations and in the different KPIs that you look at. Asia obviously feeling the impact earlier in February and accentuating in March. In Europe, 2 positive months, January and February, and a very, very strong decline in March. As I mentioned, we lost an estimated 67 million international tourists in this period, which meant that in terms of exports, revenues generated, we are estimating that that loss amounted to $80 billion. If we look ahead, and again, this is one of the hardest exercises at this moment, and we're only doing it for a global level because we do consider that uncertainty is very significant at this moment. We based our forecast on two indicators. One, an expert's revision. We've consulted our panel of experts, which is a panel that we've been actually following in terms of travel sentiment and business sentiment since 2003. So we do see a high correlation between their forecasts and evaluations and the flow of international tourism. And most of the experts, as you can see, around 39% indicated that they would only see recovery in international tourism coming in 2021. By regions, the sentiment is slightly different, and it's quite interesting that in the Americas, the sentiment is much more negative and seeing recovery coming later than, for example, actually in Europe or in Asia Pacific, which in this case is normal because the outbreak started at least 2 months before. So we also looked into one of the key elements that will trigger recovery or the change in patterns, which is when will we see some opening of borders. We know that this will be a gradual movement. Little by little, countries, there's discussion on travel corridors. So we know that it will not be an opening up of international tourism from one day to another. And based on that, we have defined 3 different scenarios. So the first scenario is that we start seeing some opening and some lifting of travel restrictions around July, which would translate into a decline around 58% of international tourists, because we do expect that the recovery will be slow and gradual. Apologies. The second scenario, we would expect a 70% decline. And in the third scenario, where borders will only start opening by the end of this year, we would see that translated into a 78% decrease. I'd like to stress that those are not forecasts. Those are just scenarios and exercises done based on possible moments where we start seeing the opening of the borders. And obviously the margin should be considered with significant caution. What does that mean? It means that we will obviously have the worst impact that international tourism has ever seen since we are counting data in the 1950s. We will probably be this year down into levels of at least the levels we had 20 years ago. So in 2000, there was 67.4 million international tourist arrivals. If we have a decline of 58%, we will be around 60-10 this year. So obviously the situation is very challenging. That reflects on the exports also, and obviously on jobs. So these are our summary of potential impacts overall. And of course, we always stress that uncertainty is one of the challenges that we face at this moment. The International Civil Aviation Organization is pointing to a 44 to 80% decline in international passengers, with obviously different impacts in the different regions. For Asia, for example, the estimates done by ICAO point to a -39 to -71% decline. So this is the scenarios that we're actually considering. Just to finalize, and coming back to the previous crisis, although, as I mentioned before, we're totally in uncharted territory here, it's interesting to look back, and I'd like to stress 2 points. One is that actually from the 3 crises, in terms of global impact, the one that we saw less time to recover to previous levels was the one of SARS. So considering that it was a pandemic as well, obviously with a totally different impact in terms of regions, the recovery time was much shorter than that of September 11 or the global economic crisis. But also it's important to note that, for example, in the more extended crisis, and again, I think the discussions on how the recovery curve will be, it's something that we can only do scenarios. At this point, no one really can know how the curve will behave, because the triggers are not something that the tourism industry can control at all. So the significant point here is that, for example, the Americas, which was the region which was most impacted by September 11, which took around 3.5 years to recover to previous levels. So I think the level of uncertainty, again, is very high. We can learn from the previous crisis to build our scenarios, but again, the triggers, as I mentioned, are basically 2. And some key considerations that I think will help us frame our scenarios is obviously looking into the pandemic trends in the different markets, looking and following up what countries are doing in terms of easing the travel restrictions and the consumer behavior. I'll finish here and leave you with this key considerations to think about. And I'd like to now actually give the floor to Sarah from Adara. Sarah has been with us from the start of this webinar, and I'm going to change a little bit the program because Sarah actually has to leave us earlier. So I will probably ask Sarah to take the lead in this webinar, and I will just leave you with this last message, with a message, as Harry mentioned before, of trust in our sector. We've been always showing that we in the past have recovered strongly. So I do think that we will again travel tomorrow, and the sector will come back to what it was. And without any further ado, I just apologize on the change of schedule, but Sarah will have to leave us at 10:55 Madrid time, which is actually 15 minutes from now. So Sarah, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sandra, and thanks again for inviting me. Yeah, and sorry that I have to leave earlier. Actually, I have a PATA webinar that I'm actually attending after this. For those who doesn't know Adara, just let me give you a brief explanation of who we are. We do tourism big data, and the sources of information that we have, it's partnerships from meta searches, online travel agencies, GDSs, hotel chains, airlines, airports, car rental. So different companies from all the different verticals of the travel sector. And the data that we get directly from them, it's what travelers are searching, booking, and loyalty program. And this really gives us a huge comprehension of the traveler's behavior. We can see how they start searching in the meta search, how they move to an OTA, how they go to an airline, to another airline, how they book, and start against the searches for hotel chains, etc. And we say that we do big data because actually we can see 900 million travelers per month. That it's a lot of travelers, but I always say that big data per se does not mean anything, just a huge quantity of data. It's how we transform it into smart data, into intelligence, that it can be actionable. And whenever we look at any situation, and even in this case, the crisis that we are going through, COVID-19, I always recommend to look at it at 3 different phases, which is the learning of the data, the action, and then measurement, so that we can learn again and create this virtuous cycle. And I think it was someone, a colleague from Cambodia, that was asking like how we can identify this this inflection point. And actually, this is what I would like to speak today to you about. It's how to use data to identify this inflection point that it's going to tell us when to launch the recovery plans and to promote again the destination. And the way I look at it, I always use hotel and flight data. Today, I will focus more on hotel data because we have Jameson from ForwardKeys that they have airline data. Also, historical versus future data and when people are actually searching and booking in the future. Let me start with the aggregated global year-over-year trend that we have seen in the hotel bookings. And as you can see, we at the moment we're 75% down from last year, and this is global. If I go to APAC specifically, it's almost like 70% as well, 60 something, 70%. But I always try to look at the positive news and try to find where we can see those green leaves. And if we look at specifically China, and that does not mean that the rest of the regions or countries will, they will have to behave like China. But I think it's interesting to look at how they are behaving and what's happening there. And also adding another point of analysis, which is comparing the domestic travelers and the international travelers. And we've been speaking a lot in the webinars how probably the domestic travelers or the proximity travelers are going to be the first ones to reactivate, right? So when we look at China, the dark purple line, that's international travelers to China. And this is hotel and flights, searches and bookings aggregated. And then the light purple, it's the domestic. If we look at the international, obviously, it dropped and went down very heavily at the beginning of the year. It got stabilized. And then as they started to de-escalate, again, the interest in traveling to China, mainly for also business purposes, went up. I don't know if you remember that, but they had to reactivate some restrictions because of being scared of the escalation again of the virus, and it went down again. And if we look at it now, it's starting to get to go upwards again. And if we look at the domestic, it was a flight completely at the beginning of the year, following a little bit the uptrend of the international with the news that there was the escalation. And then it's been very, very slowly up and down, like Professor Song was mentioning, like a little bit of a W. And we are starting to see a little bit of the upward trend, but still very stable. When looking at APAC again, as in general, and origin markets, by the way, this is global looking at APAC destinations. Not only is it interesting to compare international versus domestic to see, where is that inflection point, but also it's interesting to analyze the business travelers versus the leisure travelers. And what we've seen is from beginning of January to now, obviously the leisure travelers were the ones who stopped traveling earlier than business. But it's interesting how in some destinations we are seeing the leisure travelers reactivate the interest of traveling before the business. And that's mainly when we speak to the sector, it's because a lot of businesses, they are scared of potential legal reactions if they send one of their employees to travel and they get infected. So we are seeing in some destinations, as I said, some more like pickups in terms of leisure. But not only that, if we look at exactly how they are behaving, like how they are planning into the future their trips, we also see this not only in APAC, we've seen this in other regions, both in business and in leisure. We are seeing that if we look at how people are looking from the moment we are, from that specific date, and how they are looking to forward, the 0 to 15 days and plus the 90 days, they are both of the graphs for both business and leisure, the ones that they are picking up more quickly and have more variation. And the reasons that we find behind, it's first because if you have to go for an urgent business meeting, it makes sense that you're looking to go in the next 15 days. And also we've seen some de-escalation in some destinations. So that means that people are looking to travel maybe for a weekend close by. And obviously what we are also seeing is that people are also postponing their trips to make sure that they will be able to take that trip. So that's why also the orange one, which means that they are looking to travel after 90 days, it's also picking up in both cases. And last but not least, what I've shown you until now, it's more historical data that we are seeing every day, but it's also important how the travelers are behaving towards the future. And when we look in the slide, you see searches, but let me mention about what we see in bookings. When we look at the hotel check-in dates of bookings made after mid-March, which is important. So we are not taking into consideration what people were booking before, in this case, mainly Europe started to go on lockdown, and then the rest of the regions after APAC. We see that we see two peaks. One mid-end of May, beginning of June. So that is telling us that people are looking for that proximity trips that I mentioned before, as soon as they can go close by to where they live. And then the second peak is after the summer. So September onwards, people are reactivating the bookings because they think that they were going to be able to travel. So they are making already those bookings in terms of hotels. We don't see that much that curves in flights. But I will let Jameson speak about that. But what I wanted to show you, it's a couple of examples of, for instance, looking into the future. And what I've mentioned until now, it's bookings. And in what you see in the slide, this is searches. So the pink bars are the year-over-year variation of searches, in this case for Singapore and then Australia. And obviously, if we look at the next 20 weeks, we are still in negative. That means that people, for those check-in dates, they are not searching as much as they used to search versus last year. However, what is important here and to identify the inflection point is the evolution. And as we can see, Singapore has a pretty steady evolution of getting better week after week. However, Australia, if you can see, it has more variation. It's a little bit going upwards, then gets better, goes then again, but the main positive stream comes, as I was saying, September onwards. So in most of the destinations, we see a similar variation as Singapore and Australia. But how, the way that I look at this as a summary, it's how you can use this data for your own destinations to identify that inflection point. And just to wrap up, what I would recommend is keep an eye on not only searches, but also bookings to identify those peaks and where people are not only having that intent to travel, but also they are actually now committing to bookings. The historical data versus the future data, so that you can identify, Professor Song was mentioning, if it's either a V or a W, and identify that pinpoint, and also that's going to depend on the origin market. I always recommend for the short term to do a micro analysis, really understand the trends on how people in your neighboring countries or proximity markets, how they are behavior, but don't lose track of the macro level from the long haul, the more international markets, on how they are behaving, so that you can also plan accordingly to those markets. Keep an eye on how China is evolving, and also the COVID cases, because that's going to give us a lot of idea of how the borders are going to open again. Also, this depends on every destination, but I think it's really important to separate and understand how business versus leisure travelers are behaving. And also when we look at leisure, families, couples, and solos, to identify what's going to be the first audience that is going to be able to react and come to your destination. And last but not least, we don't have this couple of data points. I know ForwardKids has air capacity, and I would like to mention it because it's like borders can open, people from travelers from those origin markets might be starting to search, might be ready to book, but if there is no air capacity coming to your destinations, that's going to be really hard to handle. So it needs to be taken into consideration. And the second one is the security perception index. Again, we can have all these indexes, even the air capacity, but if the perception in those origin markets to your destination is that it's still not secure, you need to work and leverage this in your communication in the recovery plan, so that you can build that trust again with your travelers in the origin markets. Just on and a last note on my presentation, please utilize and leverage this situation to create an intelligent system that can help you cope not only with this crisis, but also in the future, which is going to be pretty uncertain, and Sandra mentioned. So I would recommend, please keep on learning from the different data sources, your also first data, act on it, and then do not forget to measure it, see what's working, what's not, so that you can optimize. And budgets are going to be more limited than ever. So in order for you to take the most advantage of it and make your investments more efficient and effective, keep on measuring, keep on learning, and create this virtuous circle that it's going to help you understand what is happening, and you're going to be able to adapt much better. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you for being with us before jumping to another webinar. That's how this new world allows us to do these things in a very short time. So thank you so much again, and please feel free to leave whenever you want, and we will continue on this side. And unfortunately, cannot follow you, but we will watch live afterwards. So without any further delay, I'd like to invite Jameson Wong to actually share with us his perspective on what we're seeing in terms of air capacity, air bookings. Jameson is the director of APAC for Forward Keys, and Forward Keys is a longtime partner with UNWTO, same as Adara, who's our affiliate member. So Jameson, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen from all around the world, I guess. Just wanted to quickly talk to you guys about the impacts of the COVID-19 situation on inbound air travel, specifically just for air travel. Now, we are going to be utilizing 3 different data sets this afternoon, primarily flight search, seat capacity, and actual air reservations. I will not be talking anything about forecast, but instead I'll be talking about future trends based on real tickets that have already been issued. So if you kind of look at what's been happening year to date, no surprises over here. The numbers have halved. In fact, it's minus 55%. Now, if we kind of remove the first couple of weeks of January where things were normal before all these craziness hit us, between the 20th of January to date, we are down by about 64%. Europe and Asia Pac has been the most impacted, followed by the Americas and Africa and Middle East. Now, if you kind of look at what's happening closer to home, so in the Asia Pacific region, it is very evident now that the sub-regions which are heavily reliant on the Chinese travelers has suffered heavily. So if you look at the Northeast Asia sub-region, it's minus 74% year to date. And if you look at the Southeast Asia region, we're actually down by about 54% year to date. So let's shift a little bit and not talk about travel, actualized travel. Let's look at bookings that took place or did not take place between the start of the year all the way to today. So if you kind of look at it right around this part over here where Wuhan started going the lockdown, the introduction of travel restrictions in China, that was where the Asia Pacific bookings started taking a huge beating. So the yellow bars are essentially the APAC bookings issued on a weekly basis. And very quickly you will see that 1 week post lockdown, we were at a minus 150 to minus 200% year-over-year change. And what basically this means is anything above 100% or rather below 100% year-over-year variation, we receive more flight cancellations than new bookings being issued. And as you kind of progress through the weeks to come, what happened was the virus went westwards, and we had the outbreak in Italy towards the end of February. And you can see then that's where the bookings from the European region, the bars in blue, started to take a dive as well. So kind of about 1 to 2 months lag behind the Asia Pacific bookings. Net year-to-date bookings for APAC from the beginning of the year right up to the 3rd of May. We are down by about 102%. Europe 97% down. Americas 105% down. EMEA down by about 80%. And globally, we are down by about 101% in terms of bookings made for travel into the Asia Pacific region. Now, on a slightly brighter side, let us look at China domestic. This has been, the buzzword, the buzz topic for the past couple of days now. So on the left-hand side, we have the date, or rather the weekly bookings made for China domestic air travel from the beginning of the year up to now. And on the right, we have domestic air arrivals that actualized. Okay, so on the left, I mean, it's the mathematical, it's the math effect of, a low base, right? We see a 75 percentage points recovery between the lowest part in January and February, all the way up to last week, essentially. And in terms of actual air arrivals for China domestic, it's about a 250% jump from the lowest point in the beginning of April all the way to the last week of April, which is essentially in the lead up to the Labor Day holiday, right? Now, if you kind of look at the state of the travel restrictions, pretty much, like what Sandra mentioned, pretty much every country, every nation globally has a form of restrictions in place. I think one of the good things that we can take out of this is that yesterday we have the first formal agreement between Australia and New Zealand to reopen international travel between both countries when it is safe, right? So that's the first formal agreement that we have seen, and we expect more bilateral agreements to follow in the months to come. So we have always been looking historically. Let us look somewhat into the future now. So first of all, let's look at flight searches. Yes, flight searches kind of give you an intent into the future. What are consumers searching for? But more importantly, I believe that flight searches would be the earliest indication for destinations for you guys to get a sense of whether or not there are going to be any, or rather, what kind of shifts will there be in your traditional feeder markets into the new feeder markets that are now searching for you guys. So one of the key takeaways is basically a lot of the searches that we see are for travel dates in Q4, in the later half of the year. Not so much in Q3 yet. I think there's still a lot of uneasiness around that. So frankly, a lot of the searches that are taking place, searching for Asia Pacific destinations, are for travel dates in Q4. So that's searches. Let us then look at the full infrastructure availability. Year to date, in terms of seat capacity, it's pretty much a minus 90%, give or take. Globally, we were looking at about 42 million seats any given week. And last week, we had globally 4.3 million seats available, right? And it's the same if you look at the Asia Pacific region in terms of available international seat capacity. Last year, same day, any given day, we would have about 1.7 million seats available. And today, we essentially have about 180,000 seats available being scheduled to operate from what the airlines are reporting to us right now. So in terms of infrastructure availability, we are at a 10th of what we were last year. So we have seen flight searches. We have seen the offer being the seat capacity. Let us kind of look at the summer outlook. So summer outlook being real flight tickets, flight bookings that have been issued as of 3rd of May, a few days ago. I'm not going to run through every single destination, but just very briefly, on the left, we are looking at long-haul travelers from outside of Asia traveling into Asia over the summer months in Q3. And in the table on the right, we are looking at the top 10 Asia-Pacific countries for any international travel, including intra-APAC. So yes, the numbers are bad, no surprises over here. But I think the silver lining is essentially, if we look at the pickup curve, right, for the summer season. Blue line being 2019's pickup curve for the summer travel period, and the orange one being this year's pickup curve. Now, what this means, if we kind of look at last year's second half average booking lead time, international travelers on average, they have a booking lead time of 52 days. So in actual fact, if you look at the later part of the year, most of these bookings would not have materialized anyway. So there is still a chance to kind of allow the situation to improve, more restrictions to be eased, and for more of these bookings to take place, assuming that capacity, is put back at a similar pace. Now, I've also had a quick look at some of the individual destinations within Asia, and one of the common themes that I've seen is that we are starting to get out of the free fall, if I can say that. So, we are starting to see a bottom out effect, a plateau for major city destinations, Tokyo, Shanghai, Hong Kong, Brisbane, Chongqing. All of these major destinations, I'm already starting to see a bottom out, not so much of a free fall. So, for what it's worth, I think that's slightly positive news. And to basically end it off, and to recap, we've seen flight searches, we have seen flight bookings being made, and we have seen the full infrastructure availability. And it is increasingly crucial now with what's happening around the world to constantly monitor this trio of data points, because you can't just take what happened last year plus minus 5% anymore, right? We have to constantly look at what are the consumers searching for, that being an output of confidence, for example. Even if they're searching for, can they fly, like what Sarah mentioned earlier on, and with the availability of seats by the airlines, how much of that is actually being booked, and the whole cycle just goes on and on again into the future. So I leave you with that. I'll hand it back to Sandra and Jasper. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jameson, for that overview, particularly the hopefully green shoots we start seeing, and the fact that bookings take place much later. I'd just like to mention something which also will have an impact in Asia Pacific, which is compared to Europe, the seasonality in Asia is much lower, which means that there is a bigger volume of travel during the year. So the months of September, October, and November and December do not show the same peaks as in Europe. While in Europe, the impact might be higher because the big chunk of travel happens during the summer months. The fact that Asia has a more even distribution of demand is a factor that can help that recover towards the end of the year. So without any further ado, we go from air travel to see what is happening on the ground with the hospitality sector. And I'd like to welcome Jasper Palmqvist. I hope that I've pronounced this slightly well. Jasper, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you for that, Sandra, appreciate it. Can you hear me okay? Just to make sure.
All
Great.
Clear.
Thank you. Excellent. Yeah, so let me be your weatherman for a few minutes here, and I will focus on recovery, because 0 divided by 0 is still 0. So I will try and find the nuggets where we can and the green shoots, and talk through a couple of scenarios as well. Obviously, like everyone else has said, we can't cover everything. So at str.com, our website, you have videos, all sorts of stuff, other resources for your country, or you can reach out to us, of course, for anything. But so as I try to run through a few countries here and scenarios, we should start with the good news, where we've seen recovery, and then we have to start with China. And then this is a famous curve. We've now seen it in many things, and there's 4 different paths that we've gone through. You have a 90% fall in hotel occupancy through a couple of weeks. You have a 2-month period there of slow recovery, just getting off the base. And then we started to see in April this normal patterns of weekday, weekend, some little bit of travel happening, and then obviously a phenomenal positive, encouraging signs this last weekend with the May Day holiday. A spike with 10 percentage points in increase, hotels that were full, which is amazing to say these days, and also rates that started to find some ground across mainland China. Obviously, a lot is leisure and that kind of stuff. Likewise, you look at South Korea, who now for 2.5 months have seen this low baseline of hotel occupancy, but also these allowed staycations, so getting around on weekend getaways. But this long weekend as well, the Golden Week, proved similar to China, 50% occupancies. And in regional markets, Jeju, Daejeon City, you saw 100% occupancy in hotels and rates also picking up. So South Korea definitely part of that bucket of recovery markets already with visible signs for sure, which leads us to what next? And it's absolutely true that not every market recovers in the same way. But when we look at our 35 years of data and all the disasters that have happened in the past, you can absolutely draw some major parallels in the fundamentals on a lot of markets. So where next? Well, if we move down to the Pacific, it's important to know that everyone moved the same way. This is just Australia, Fiji, and New Zealand. You can take money, obviously, Pacific markets and Pacific Islands into this. Around mid-March, everything drops and it's down there. Now, when you just look, and I should say for Fiji, obviously being hit by cyclones and things after this did not help. We know now that no travel other than essential in quarantine is filling the hotels. And it's great to see to create a trans-Tasmanian bubble to see that help. But just from an Australian perspective, being such a large country, that intra or interstate travel should prove a really strong driver. And we see this now tracking it as one of the markets that could come next. There is very strong demand drivers for that weekend and leisure business. But before you get too excited, we know that as in any country, it depends on authority measures and how that will play out. So it's not necessarily done yet. And similar to other speakers, if we look pickup rate 90 days out, just the other day, so in the first part of that graph, you see some occupancy numbers, that's isolation and quarantine guests. So after that, zero pickup. So all those searches are not really turning into bookings just yet. So there's no confidence just yet with the government not yet putting allowance to normal travel around the region. But we think that the fundamentals and the signals mean that this should be one of the next markets. And that volume is likely to be outside city centers, surrounding markets. And remember, school holidays coming up in June, July should be a big driver for that country as well. So quick thing, and then you look, just if we look further out, October, November, looks like a little bit of a spike there. Remember the scale, we're talking 9–10% of occupancy rates there. So nothing big here, either on Melbourne, Sydney, or other markets that we've seen compared to that. So if those are examples of something that come, what about later? Now the problem is, and I can probably take every single Asia Pacific market in this big bucket of later, and there are huge variations that we often have to explain to, I suppose, Americans and Europeans, that Asia is big and it's very, very diverse, right? So quickly look at Indian Ocean as an example. Maldives and Sri Lanka depend and rely more on international travel for obvious reasons. And this zero axis right now means low single digit, and they need that to jumpstart. India is a huge domestic market that could, in that capacity, come back in a different way potentially, even though it's obviously quite locked down and hotels closed around that country as well, massively now. And if you look across the ASEAN, each of these lines here represents a country. And as you can see, the majority quickly in March went down below 20%, and through April stayed down there and low occupancies because of no travel and the restrictions. But you see Singapore and Philippines above 50%. So we often get the question, how is this the case? Well, Singapore, it's easy, it's isolation and quarantine guests. It's a small country and it's full with people who are guests, if you will, of the deceased. So we expect that to, as Singapore is managing the situation, to drop further down. Philippines case, it's a little bit different because where you had partial lockdowns around the country and variations. And compared to India, in the Philippines, the call centers, for instance, a big business in BPOs, they remained open. So business around that within a 2-kilometer radius spurred a lot of good business for that, apart from extended stay business in the country as well. So they remained at a high occupancy level since then as well, now for 6 to 7 weeks, which looks like it's normal business, but it's not a normal reality these days, is it? And I should say also there, you look at Japan as a market, there's another example of a delayed impact, because 22% in February, 62% year-over-year declines in occupancy. It's actually better than many other markets, and it's a delayed reaction. And obviously, as you've seen now in April with the state of emergency, and later on, and now Japan has also reached that lower level where hotels have had to close, and strong limitations on travel and movement. So now, again, Japan is a large domestic market, so there's an opportunity for them to reboot and rebound in a different way than other markets. We are seeing, for instance, in Indonesia, Malaysia, also big domestic markets. We study that closely. We think there are some markets that can reboot a little bit quicker. And in Thailand, we've heard hotels that are receiving, and we see in the data, they receive bookings for December from Europe. That's optimistic, and we like that. So there's an opportunity there, perhaps. So the recap of the fundamentals of a recovery. Now, so again, we look at all the recoveries from terror attacks, political, financial issues, natural disasters, health crisis throughout the last 30 years, and in the forecasting we do. And these themes keep coming back, that it starts with domestic. It's local accessible travel, as you see in the greater Shanghai area and Chandao Lake and those areas, massively benefiting right now, and social distancing and all those kind of things. And leisure travel is usually the first. No corporate wants to be the big one that says, we'll go in, we'll risk it for our employees. And then you have weekend business, and it does depend on which market, which hotel class. So if it's budget or luxury, starts first. So in China, it was mid-scale and economy that has booted off and grown much faster, quicker. And it's only after that we'll see the corporate business, the group and MICE business, and then the international travel. So these steps, which in my wonderful slide graph shows this, there is a quick slide down, but the stairs up will vary immensely. And we saw that through MERS, through SARS, to any political challenges, to earthquakes, terror attacks. It depends, sometimes even at sub-market level, how you pick up the pace. Now, we do think in our forecasting that we do every quarter that 2022 is most likely to be like 2019 at an Asia Pacific level for hotel performance. Now, remember, 2018 is for us the high watermark in performance. 2019 was pretty good, so we expect it to be a 3-year comeback overall with huge variations in between. Because the risks, as have been mentioned, quite a few already, are so many. I just list a few here. I'm a fan of analyzing risk, but will there be one global health certificate thing? I'm not necessarily subscribing to the theory that the travel community will be different moving forward. I think short term, yes, but long term, there is just so much in this industry and how people travel and the money available in it, that I think we will return to a reasonably similar world on a longer term. But that's my view. So all these risks will play in lower wealth and how we travel, which airlines produce as well. So my conclusions, China absolutely seems to be end of the beginning. We see over half of the occupants they should be. China right now should be 70, 75%. So to be at 50 plus is obviously a very strong signal. We know that Korea has gone the same path, started to see some easing. We know Vietnam is easing up as well, leisure activities and travel, which is a strong signal as well. Australia and New Zealand has some good fundamentals to start a comeback as well, perhaps then combined with New Zealand. And just if you're in an Asia Pacific market, when you look across US and Europe and Latin America for that matter, and Africa where we cover as well, tons of markets are still at low levels. There are huge variations in how they plan to open up, depending on the political system and where they are, but there are large restrictions and hotels around the world are still shutting down. You'll have a US state opening up, but then in other parts of the world, they're still restricting things. So the variations will come out at extremely different paces. But my favorite quote remains throughout this: it'll be okay in the end. If it's not okay, it's just not the end. And there will be a bounce back because our industry is just too strong for that to happen. And I would say the final point is hotel performance is one thing, but when you look at our P&L data, we would expect GOP, so the profit margins, that comeback to be slower. We've seen that in every negative downturn that's happened because the increase in cost and what comes out of it. So any questions now or later on any of your markets, let me know. But that's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jasper, for that very insightful look into hotels. I think we all coincide on a gradual recovery, slow and gradual, as many say, and also the issue of domestic. And I would add a very important point, close by domestic. People will want to feel confident, and probably at a distance they can manage by car somehow whenever it's possible. Without any further ado, we're trying here to give you an overview of the KPIs which are important to keep under our radar as we manage this crisis. So we've looked into the overall picture, forecasting. We've went through airline capacity and bookings and hotels, and now with Jasper on where we see the sector in terms of occupancy, but also RevPAR. I think an important point is the return. When the recovery is there, we will see slower demand, but also social distance rules might obviously impact the capacity of delivering full capacity. So that will also be an issue to consider. And we will now look into a very important point that Jasper mentioned at the end, which is consumer confidence. And I'd like to invite Olivier Henry Biodot. He's the CEO of TCI Research, who are an affiliate member with UNWTO. And he will give us an overview of what is the talk going on online about travel and about the challenges of COVID-19. Olivier, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. Can you just allow me to share my screen, because it seems it's blocked for me? Am I punished?
There is an issue. Our colleagues can share it with you. If I can ask our colleagues from the UNWTO Academy, who are the angels behind, they say done. So you should be able to share it now. Perfect.
So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's thanks again, Sandra, for that virtual trip to Asia. I think the question, as it was mentioned earlier by you and many colleagues, of trust and reputation about destinations, about the travel industry overall, is becoming very important. We know tomorrow people will travel where they can travel, where they can afford to travel. But from 2021, they will at least travel where they want to go. And there the reputation, as shared on the media by consumers, by citizens and brands, will eventually play a major role in choosing destinations. And so if we look at the numbers so far, there's been no less than 1.4 billion global conversations on social channels mentioning the virus and the COVID-19 in the context of travel and tourism, which is just amazing. And still today, 1 in 3 conversations online mentioning Asia and Asian destinations are still mentioning the virus. And it's of course a mix of, could be some positive stories. There are some, but it's obviously mostly negative. And the fact is that, you know, from the beginning of the year, many destinations in Asia have been really portrayed as epicenters of the disease and epicenters of the virus. A lot of conversations about, of course, travel bans and airlines and airports, hubs, logistic issues and hotel refund issues, and, you know, major attractions closed, and MICE industry a bit down and closing. And also, you know, the concept that Asian destinations are absolutely beautiful when there is no tourist. I don't know how many conversations around, you know, no pollution there and wildlife coming back there in that destinations, thanks to the fact that there is no tourist. This is, of course, not good for the industry and not good for many destinations. So having said that, the pretty good news, if we look at the polarity of conversations about Asia in the context of travel and tourism, if you see the green line, which is all about Asia and Pacific region, of course, at the beginning, the whole region was kind of pointed out as the source of the problem, which is of course not good. But then after weeks and weeks of negative sentiments, or let's say kind of a zero net sentiment score, we are seeing the good news that the whole region is going up, and up to now, we can safely say that the region, Asia and Pacific, has already restored a half of the reputation and the positive reputation so far. And this is really shared and fueled by the fact that still today there are many and growing numbers of past visitors sharing good souvenirs about Asia. There are a lot of people now talking about dreaming to visit Asia again. A lot of virtual reality experiences, many great stories of solidarity and heroes, local heroes. So where Asia was kind of portrayed as a source of a problem, today we see there's a growing sentiment trend that Asia is now the source of hope again. And also more recently, a lot of positive conversations about all these operational standards implemented in the hotel industry, in the cruise industry, so people can experience soon again Asia in a safe way. Having said that, the sentiment drivers according to the verticals are very different. Just before that, I mentioned earlier, it's of course the global picture, but there are many differences between destinations, of course. As you can see, Asia is going up. We still have an issue, well, somehow shared on the social web, social sentiment about China as a whole. It's going slightly up, but it's still quite negative. But in the meantime, there's been a lot of destinations which have passed through the crisis, protecting their reputation and being spared. I can only mention, destinations like Nepal or Sri Lanka or Myanmar. There's been still quite relatively protected in terms of reputation. When we look at the verticals, this is a critical point, because there we see, as I said, many verticals around or growing concerns about logistics and all the mobility, all transportation experiences about airports, hubs, and airlines, which, as you can see on the curve, has been really hardly impacted by the crisis in terms of reputation. But still, during the same period, you have all around attractions, specific experiences, cultural experiences, natural experiences, still have protected their reputation. So it means actually that people are really able to project again visiting specific attractions, specific experiences in a destination. So if you look at the sentiment, Asia travel is kind of in between, but when people talk about Asian food while traveling, is still very positive. So it means it's easier for people to imagine traveling for seeing the lifetime experience, the Great Wall in China, better than, or it's more easy to project on that than just imagine traveling in Asia again in a short term. And I will leave you with just 2 takeaways among the 13 takeaways that we tend to share from what we can learn from the sentiment. Social sentiment drivers in Asia Pacific, probably 2 things. The first is how to celebrate the reopening. It's nice to celebrate that, but it has to be done in a very smart way. And what Wuhan has done, celebrating that in a way to pay tribute and thank very much their local heroes, has been very, very smart. And the last point is about focusing particularly in Asia, which is a region seen as highly dense populations, where the social distancing is maybe a bit hard to manage. Then having a very close look in terms of destination management to include airports, cruise lines, airlines, public transportations, and making sure that all the certification and the trust that is built is also built from those particular verticals will be very important. And keeping the communication efforts, as I said, on very specific experiences. So this is it for me, pretty short. The last word is, it seems hope is back on track, and especially from Asia. And I think it's a pretty good news to share with you. And I would like to give you the best greetings from Brussels, where the weather is awful, to the amazing Asia, where I really hope to be able to travel again in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Olivier, for that so important insight in a moment where consumer perception and consumer confidence is going to be one of the key elements. I'd like to share some of the questions that have been arriving to us through the chat and also through the channel in YouTube. And one of the questions that we have is, based on all the data that you all the speakers have mentioned before, when do you see the MICE industry in Asia returning to recovery? I don't know who wants to take the lead here. Just raise your hands and I'll see you. Very good. Jasper, please go ahead.
I can say a little bit because we do study it obviously with the segmentation business. And I'd say we have seen in China mostly, a little bit in Korea and some places, even a little bit in Vietnam now, some mice visit, but we're talking small business, talking in surrounding areas outside, anything big or major, obviously not seen yet. It keeps being, you know, push that can down the road, that continues to flow. So it's the same, it's as easy to answer so as when the virus will go away. So impossible. But the small surrounding mice events will come, and we're seeing that already. And I think we'll see a little bit of that. The interesting question around that is actually, how about the big events? How will this change? Because I said earlier, no, I don't think it's going to change too much. What about those mega events, right? The medical events, like the 20,000, the 80,000, the IT events. Maybe there is something in there that will change. I would absolutely agree with that.
Well, Sandra, your microphone is not on. Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Well, if I may, thank you, Sandra. And I certainly agree with the Jasper. And this is actually the same discussion that we had a webinar with the European Department. And then they were saying that the small size of the convention and meeting can be coming, but the big size of the big mega event will come very late because of some regulation and the funding issue, legal issue. And then so my colleague in Indonesia, maybe I will encourage you to visit our YouTube, the webinar, and my colleague from regional department will indicate how you can access it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harry. Harry was just referring to a webinar that UNWTO Department for Europe ran last week with some of the major associations in the mice industry. I think, again, here, the domestic market will be the key. And in many countries, often the mice industry in the domestic market is, again, very important. Obviously, as Jasper said, I think the size of the parties will depend on the social distancing measures of the governments, which at the end will determine the evolution of the capacity to actually host those events. I think also we will probably see, and many people mention it, the individual corporate returning first, because as companies restart their operations, there will be some need to travel. So I think also for those who are especially in the hotel industry, probably corporate individual will be a first hint into that market. I think that that was it. Without any further delay, we have a special guest with us because we wanted to speak data, but we also wanted to bring in the different views from the member states in Asia Pacific. As Harry mentioned, UNWTO has created a platform on our website, www.unwto.org. There's a COVID space where you can find a map with all the measures that countries have been implementing around the world to support the tourism sector. And this has been one of the key elements of our recovery. I think without that support, it would be really difficult to keep our industry going. And we see that private sector and public sector are working closer together, which is also good. So with that, it's my pleasure to welcome directly from Tokyo, our Vice Commissioner from the Japan Tourism Agency, Mr. Takashima, who I see already on the screen. I don't know if he can hear me. Mr. Takashima, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear
Very
me?
good. Perfect. Oh. Fantastic. So welcome, and welcome to join us this afternoon for you, this morning here for us in Europe. And I'll give you the floor to share some of the measures that Japan has actually been implementing to support the tourism sector.
Okay, so thank you, Sandra, and good afternoon, everyone. Actually, good evening, everyone. So first of all, I'd like to express my appreciation for the initiative and the members of the Asia Pacific Department of the UNWTO to arrange this webinar in a timely manner. It gives us great opportunity to share insights on how we address the impact of COVID-19. I'd like to briefly explain our latest situation and our policy measures. So COVID-19 is heavily impacting on the tourism industry in Japan. The number of domestic and international flights decreases drastically, and tours and hotel reservations are also largely canceled. So tourism businesses have been forced into bankruptcy or temporarily closed, and all tourism destinations are facing severe difficulties. As for policy measures to support affected industries, the Japanese government is taking an emergency economic measures, which amounts to around $1 trillion to support employment and business continuity in all industries, including tourism. We are expanding employment adjustment subsidies and providing strong liquidity support, including interest-free unsecured loans. While doing our best to prevent the spread of COVID-19, we are fully committed to supporting the survival of tourism business, such as travel, hotel, and transportation, and overcoming this crisis. Looking ahead of the containment of coronavirus, it is necessary for us to share knowledge on how we could restart tourism while preventing respread of the virus, as well as securing safety and security for travelers. And on this point, we expect strong leadership of the UNWTO. Once the situation calms down, we will support recovery of domestic tourism first, while ensuring safety and security. The emergency economic package includes strong demand stimulation measures for tourism, around $12 billion and subsidy in the form of discounts and coupons to support tourism, transport, food services, and event businesses for an immediate recovery. I'd like to briefly introduce the mechanism of this policy. So we still need to decide the detail of this mechanism, but basically our tourism stimulation measures composes of two financial assistance to travelers, one giving discounts for travel products, and two issuing coupons usable in the destinations. This coupon can be used in a wide range of facilities, such as souvenir shops, restaurants, tourist attractions and activities, transportation, etc., so that money goes not just to hotel or accommodation, but to entire region. When travelers purchase travel products at travel agencies, OTA, or hotel reservation systems, they can basically get 50% discounts with the financial support by the government. Maximum financial support per one night stay of a traveler is around $200, and you can use this scheme as many times as desires. Among this financial support for each traveler, around 70%, for example, goes to direct discount for travel products, and around 30% are given by the coupons usable in the destinations. For example, if a traveler purchases travel products, which costs around $400, a traveler receives around $140 discount and receives $60 coupons usable in the destination. We expect that these stimulus measures can accelerate recovery of any tourism-related industries and support national destinations and local economies. Finally, since COVID-19 has had an unprecedented impact on tourism industries worldwide, it is crucial that the nations and international organizations share knowledge and information to overcome this crisis. So we are happy to hear your ideas. In conclusion, I once again would sincerely like to thank UNWTO for organizing this meeting. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Vice Commissioner, for joining us this morning and for sharing such a detailed information. It's very interesting to see the voucher scheme for domestic tourism. We've heard Iceland here in Europe is also thinking of a similar scheme, and I think we need to learn from what you're doing, and particularly the fact that there's no limit to the use of it. It's not that you can use it once. You can actually use it more often. So that is a good opportunity for those who can actually travel time-wise or budget-wise to repeat their traveling through the country. I don't know in the chat if there's any questions that would like to share with either of our speakers. I think we've kind of gone through all of them, but I'd just like to probably close with one more technical overview before I give the floor to Harry to close the session. I want to thank obviously Jasper, Jameson, Sarah, who left us already, Professor Song and Olivier for joining us this morning. I think the message here from the side of UNWTO when we organize these webinars is first to share knowledge and share what are the information available, but also to build on the importance of building country-specific intelligence systems for tourism. There's a lot of data out there, but sometimes the difficulty is in how do we bring that all together if I'm a destination, if I'm a country, in building my own system of tourism intelligence. And in that sense, UNWTO is here at your disposal, the member states, to actually go through that process with us. Using your traditional data, using big data from the different sources, air travel, hotels, perceptions. I think it's very important that we try to build together new KPIs for tourism that allows us to actually measure what's happening on the ground and orient our decisions in a much better way. I'd just like to say also all the presentations will be available at UNWTO website, and you can receive the link very soon after we finish this webinar. And finally, I'll pass the floor to Harry, our Regional Director for Asia at UNWTO, to close this late evening webinar in Asia.
Well, once again, thank you so much, Sandra and your team for bringing this webinar on the impact of the COVID-19 with so many experts and sharing their insight and data-driven forecast, in particular in the case of Asia and the Pacific. So I thank all the speakers, Jasper, Olivier, and Jamison, and Dr. Song, and also very high senior official from Japan, Jun Takashina-san. And well, I mean, this is something that we all got, importance of data-driven analysis and measure had to be taken for the destination, not only for mitigating the impact or managing the crisis, but also I think that it is a way to identify some opportunity always come out of the crisis. And I mentioned a glimmer of hope in the beginning that maybe if I just elaborate a minute that in case of Korea that Jasper already mentioned that now the Korea, which earned reputation on controlling quite well the coronavirus, so the people already started traveling. And then over the last national holiday, what it called the Golden Week, which has 4 to 6 days, that the Jeju Island, which is one of the most popular destinations, annually receive 15 million tourists. So during this holiday, we were told that 196,000 visitors realized. And obviously, this large group visitors have raised a concern over possible transmission of the new coronavirus. So Dr. Song mentioned that the airport, strict airport control will be done. So the local government, they tighten their measure against all the virus by testing the visitor, which has over temperature like 37.3 degrees. So they already had a test like 85, the fever in the airport. And then Sandra mentioned that, Olivier also mentioned the consumers' confidence. And then it is interesting to notice that our affiliate member, Jeju Tourism Organization, they found extraordinary number of youngsters, 20-something, and then also the honeymooner were outnumbered. So, which means that the young people, they are more confident about their health. So they are more active in traveling. And then also, according to the survey, more than 50% of respondents, they mentioned they chosen Jeju Island because they can't go overseas, the travel. So this is something that I just want to share, that from Korea, the people are ready to travel outside as far as they have confidence certain destination. So with that, I once again thank you all the speakers, and also I want to appreciate all my colleagues and RDAP team, and also in particular the UNWTO Academy, who were all behind the screen and make sure that the smooth running of this webinar. And in closing that, I just want to reassure you, all the members and participants, for your confidence and in trusting UNWTO. So we will maintain close communication with you, and we will try to deliver, as Sandra mentioned, that there are so many products and the report. So please keep us checking our website, and we will update you all the time. So last but not least, let us stay a little bit longer, and then so that we can travel tomorrow together. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Harry. Thank you, everyone. Keep safe.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Song. Thank you, Takasino-san.